Hello students, this is part 2 of the Reconstruction audio presentation. I wanted to point out another fact about some other facts about the Freedmen's Bureau. I talked about how the Freedmen's Bureau was set up before the Civil War ended to help African Americans adapt to freedom. They also helped set up colleges and universities and schools across the South to help educate former enslaved African Americans, teach them how to read and write. They also taught poor white Southerners as well. So education was a big important aspect of helping former enslaved African Americans adapt to freedom. On this page right here, you have a map exercise to do, and it says answer these map questions, and you have to study the map. The blue states represent the Confederate states. Well, teal color, I guess you can call it teal or blue, bluish green, whatever. And the key says 1870, dated readmission. What that means is that's the year that the state came back into the United States, that they agreed to be loyal to the U.S. government and be loyal to the Constitution of the United States. They had to change their constitutions at the state level to be readmitted back into the Union. And only like 10% of the state legislators had to pledge loyalty or an oath to be loyal to the United States. It wasn't very high percentage because they knew that if it was higher than that, then they would not be back into the Union. And because you still had a lot of bitterness and anger by Southerners at the time, and they would have disagreed with anything that made them rejoin the Union. 1871, that year that's like purplish, that's the date of defeat of radical Reconstruction government. That's when the Southerners defeated the radical Republicans to take back in charge of their state government. And you see some teal colored lines. That is the military district boundary. I already told you that the teal colored states represent the Confederate states. So the country had to be put back together. That's one thing I want you to understand. So question number 1 says, how many Confederate states were there? Number 2, what was the earliest state to be readmitted back into the Union? What states were the latest to be readmitted back into the Union? 3, what do the border lines around the states in the Confederacy represent? 4, how many military districts were there during Reconstruction of the South? 5, what states or territories border Confederate states? 6, why do you think there were military districts in the South and not in the North? Explain. So go ahead and pause the video and answer these questions in your packet on a piece of paper. Whatever helps you. Another aspect about the Reconstruction period are the 3 important men during Reconstruction and the legacy that they left behind. Legacy is something that you leave behind that you want to be remembered for after you pass away or you retire. When I pass away one day, I want to be known as a great teacher. That would be my legacy to leave behind. I want to throw that out there. From left to right, these gentlemen are very recognizable. You have Abraham Lincoln. His Reconstruction plan called for reconciliation. Reconciliation means that you make up with a friend. You get over your differences and you're not mad at each other anymore, because our country was united at one time and we had different sides that it's like a family fight. And when you have a family fight or you have a fight with a friend and you make up, you still are angry. You still had a little bit of bitterness there. You still have ill feelings, but it takes time for those ill feelings to go away. And Lincoln said, you know what? Brush it off. We're Americans. We need to come back together and be unified. So his Reconstruction plan called for reconciliation. Again, he never saw that go into fruition because he died at the end of the war. Preservation of the Union was more important than punishing the South. Let me repeat that again in simple terms. Keeping the country together was more important than blaming and punishing the South for them breaking away. And Lincoln didn't like people being mad at the South. He said, get over it. They made a mistake. Let's move on. We need to stick together. This gentleman here in the middle is Frederick Douglass. Like I said earlier, he was an abolitionist. An abolitionist, somebody who speaks out or who is against slavery. He was also for women's rights and women's suffrage as well. I want to point that out. He was an ambassador to Haiti, and he served in a lot of important roles throughout his life. It was important that really important fact about him is that he was a slave, and that he disguised himself as a sailor to escape from slavery. And he learned how to read and write, and he helped publish a newspaper called the North Star. And he spoke abroad in England and France about ending slavery and how slavery was wrong. He fought for the adoption of constitutional amendments that guarantee voting rights. So he supported the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment. We learned that the 14th Amendment pushed for equal rights and equal protection under the law for all citizens. And the 15th Amendment gave all men the right to vote regardless of what color they were or are. And he was a powerful voice for human rights and civil liberties for all. So basic rights he really pushed for: right to vote, right to bear arms, right to own property, right to have life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, to be treated free, to have those freedoms and enjoy them. And everybody knows who this gentleman is right here, West Point graduate. His name is Robert E. Lee. He urged Southerners to reconcile with Northerners at the end of the war and reunite as Americans when some continued to fight. And we know that Robert E. Lee was opposed to slavery. The reason why he turned down a job from Abraham Lincoln to be a commander in the Union Army was because he was very loyal to the state of Virginia. He's very loyal to his homeland, his birthplace. He loved Virginia so much. He became the president of Washington College, which is now known as Washington and Lee University. And that is in Lexington, Virginia, which is north of Bedford County. So these three men left an important legacy during the time of Reconstruction that all Americans can be proud of. And with this page, you can use this information to make a character web or foldable, and that's one of your personalized learning activities. So feel free to refer back to this. You'll also do some brain pop videos and watch a YouTube video on these gentlemen to gather more information about their legacy and why they're important to our country's history. For this activity, you have to match the quote with the person who made it. I'm not going to read through these quotes for you. All you have to do is draw a line from the person to the quote who would say that. And again, you can look back at the previous page to help you apply that knowledge about who would say these quotes. Okay. Well, my favorite quote that I'm going to read first, and I said I wasn't going to read through them, I'm going to read it because it's so important. It says, "With malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God give us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we're in, to bind up the nation's wounds." And that is on the Lincoln Memorial. Oh, I gave it away. Sorry about that. That's on the Lincoln Memorial. And you'll see that when we go on our 6th grade field trip to Washington, D.C. So I gave away number 1. Abraham Lincoln said that. So you have to figure out the other 2, and not going to help you. This page talks about African Americans who were elected officials during Reconstruction. And like I said, African Americans earned the opportunity and the right to serve and be elected to office for the first time. You have Hiram Revels, the first black senator from Mississippi, served from 1870 to 1871. Then Blanche Bruce served as the first black senator elected to a full term from 1875 to 1881 from Mississippi. And you have P.B.S. Pinchback, governor of Louisiana, 1872 to 1873. The first elected governor since Reconstruction was L. Douglas Wilder from the great state of Virginia in 1989. Want to throw some Virginia history there. Oops, we'll go back. Here's some activity. This talks about the end of Reconstruction. It says Reconstruction ended in 1877 as a result of the compromise of the election, the outcome of the election of 1876. Federal troops were removed from the South, and the rights that African Americans had gained were lost through Jim Crow laws. So they had this election, and it was between Rutherford B. Hayes and Tilden. No one won the right number of electoral votes. So a committee met and said that, okay, we're going to pick Rutherford B. Hayes as long as he decides to remove the federal troops from the South. And the Democrats in the South voted for Rutherford B. Hayes. He's a Republican. And basically it was a bad deal. It was a horrible deal. That's like taking the cops away from a crime-ridden area, because if you take the cops away, crime's going to get worse. And so when federal troops were removed from the South, all the laws and all the freedoms that protected African Americans were lost through Jim Crow laws. And it was very sad for African Americans. Jim Crow laws segregated people based on their race. Separate schools, separate water fountains, separate graveyards, separate Bibles, separate entrances to hospitals, just separate places. And it made African Americans feel distant and unequal and inferior. It's like they went back to being slaves again, not in body, but in mind. So the Jim Crow laws came into effect because Reconstruction ended. You know, we'll talk more about that later. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about the Civil Rights Movement with Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and the March on Washington. Carpetbaggers played a role in Reconstruction. So this guy looks crazy right here. It looks spooky. So use your book on page 137 to describe the image of this political cartoon. Explain what the artist is trying to say. So use your book to do this page. The Freedmen's Bureau. It says list ways the Freedmen's Bureau benefited ex-slaves after the Civil War during Reconstruction. Use page 128 in your history book. This talks about the Ku Klux Klan and the Redeemers and the Black Coats. That's a scary picture right there. We'll talk more about that later. That's just scary. And here's a political cartoon. This is a critical thinking activity. So you have to look at this political art cartoon and answer questions 1 through 5. And here's a picture of federal troops occupying the South in this picture. And go ahead and complete this diagram activity. It says efforts to gain black equality during the late 19th century. First, then, next, and then following Reconstruction. It says use the text box below to place the events correctly in the boxes. You may just place the number. It says 1, 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. 2, rights gained, rights blacks gained, rights, I can't read today. Rights to blacks gained were lost through Jim Crow laws. Black codes adopted by southern states to limit economic and physical freedom of former slaves. And slavery is practiced in the South on plantations. So you put these events in order as to when they happened. And here are some follow-up questions that you can use as a study guide to help you prepare for a test. Alright, that's a wrap. I'm done with part 2. Complete any assignments that I've told you to do throughout this packet and Edpuzzle videos that will be embedded. Thank you and have a nice day. Thanks for listening.